In this video, I'm talking about how I almost died. What's up, guys? This is Michael Aron with Author Level Up, bringing you writing videos every week to help you write better, write faster, and be a better author. So if you're new here, consider subscribing. Click that little subscribe button and the little bell next to it to get notifications every time I have a new writing video. And in this writing video, I'm talking about my near-death experience in how I almost died back in 2012. And this is a question that I've been getting a lot lately in comments on my videos and via email. Just people just kind of curious on, if I may ask, how did you almost die? And I've answered all of them. I have no problem sharing it. But I realized that I didn't have a dedicated video on the topic. So what I thought I would do is, since I'm kind of testing out my studio and doing some new videos, that I would kind of take this time to talk about it. So the year was 2012, and I think I was 24 at the time. And interestingly enough, my wife and I were vegetarians. So we had been vegetarians and had been living a vegetarian lifestyle for, I don't know, I think almost a year, and had been doing really well at it. In fact, I think I lost 10 pounds just from stopping eating meat altogether. And it was really, really cool. But one of the downsides of being a vegetarian is that restaurants hate you. So, unless you live on like the West Coast of the United States, at least here, restaurants don't care about vegetarians. I mean, they put these sad salads on the menu and so on and so forth. And so my wife and I had gotten used to not eating out. Well, what did we decide to do one night? We decided, it's our anniversary. We're going to go out and have a nice dinner. And we went out and had this dinner at a nice restaurant here in Des Moines. And later that night, I fell ill with what I thought was food poisoning. And I'll spare you guys the gastrointestinal details, right? But I was just having these really, really bad stomach pains to the point where it was just excruciating. I mean, I was screaming at the top of my lungs because it was so painful. And so my wife rushed me to the hospital in the middle of the night. And the hospital, they immediately admitted me because I was in so much pain. And so, they gave me pain medication and all that. And so everything after this is kind of a blur for me, but like an interesting blur, because I was on, morphine. When you're doped up on morphine and you've got all kinds of having hallucinations and things. But this is basically how I remember it. The doctors were treating me for food poisoning. I had some sort of food poisoning. I don't know if it was something I ate at this particular restaurant. I don't know that if it was the vegetarian lifestyle that we had that kind of made me more susceptible to certain things. I don't really know what it was per se that caused the food poisoning. But while I was being treated for the food poisoning, which was a relatively simple thing to treat in a hospital. I mean, they just make you comfortable. And then you just kind of wait it out. And they may give you a little bit of medicine, right? While I was being treated for that, I picked up an infection from the hospital. Now, I don't know how I got the infection from the hospital, and I didn't know that I picked up an infection at the time in the hospital, but I picked up an infection. And what ended up happening was, as I should have been getting better, I kind of peaked, and then I started getting worse. And like I said, I'll spare you the gastrointestinal details, but it could have been anything. It could have been one of the procedures that the doctors did, and they maybe didn't sterilize one of their pieces of equipment. It could have been that I accidentally touched an unclean surface and then touched my mouth and didn't know it. I mean, like I said, I wasn't in any place to really be diligent with, since I was on hallucinations. But so I caught an infection, and I started having these really bad fevers, like 102, 103, 103.5 fevers. I think that's what they were. I mean, they were high. They were really, really high. And so I was having fever hallucinations on top of the morphine. I mean, it was really, really bad. And the doctors couldn't figure it out. Like, they just didn't know. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know what the problem was. They just kept giving me medicine and kept saying, "Oh, you'll be better," and so on and so forth. And literally, I came to my deathbed. I literally didn't know what was going to happen, because it turns out, through the advice of a friend that I had that was a doctor who lived in another city, called her one day, and my wife was telling her what my symptoms were, and she's like, "Oh, it sounds like you have blah, blah, blah." And so my wife was like, "Hey, doctors, I think he has blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, we never thought about that. And it turns out it was blah, blah, blah. And they gave me some medicine and it was gone in like 3 days. But if I had continued having fevers for the length of time that I had then, I would have died. And the reason I say that is because when I got out of the hospital, there was an article in the USA Today, which is a major paper here in the United States, about this exact same infection and how it was killing people in hospitals across the country and how it was killing people my age. And the reason for it was because of sanitation practices at hospitals. And then it was also because doctors were not equipped or didn't understand the threats. And so we're treating people for things that they thought, other things that they thought that it could potentially be, when it was in fact this infection. And that was really scary. But anyway, before I'll get back to getting better and all that. There's one major story that I always tell on all the podcast networks about the experience, and that was, I was on morphine. I was on some pretty heavy hallucinations, and I remember laying on my hospital bed. Okay, actually, I have two stories. Okay, the first story is just funny. So the first story was that I was laying on my hospital bed, and when I was in the hospital, you can't eat solid food. So I had to eat Jell-O and this really bad like mashed potatoes that weren't mashed potatoes. I don't know what they were, but they weren't good. So I had to eat all this crap, right? And so I just wanted a cheeseburger. I don't know why. I just wanted a cheeseburger. And so I remember, as vivid as day, laying on this bed, and in the middle of the night, I'm having hallucinations, and this giant cheeseburger is sitting on the window talking to me. And he's got like arms and legs, and he's like, hey, let's get out of here. Let's go. And I remember having this full out conversation with this cheeseburger. And my wife is just like, okay, what's going on here? So anyway, that inspired one of my first series, Moderation Online, which is basically it's a series about a group of anthropomorphic vegetables taking on an evil empire of processed foods. And the reason for that was because I literally had the vision of that story because of those morphine hallucinations. Anyway, that story is going to come back to bite me one day. Somebody's going to say, man, this guy was dreaming about cheeseburgers or something. But that's one of the reasons that this story helped me become a writer. But the second story I want to tell you, which is the story I tell on podcasts and interviews and things like that, is that I was laying on a hospital bed and I was really thinking about what am I doing with my life, right? I mean, up until that point, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I was working in insurance, and I still work in insurance today, and it's been a good career for me. But at the time, the job I was in was just really crappy. I mean, I was a claims adjuster. I was getting beat up on phone calls, tons of things to work on, and it just was not a very pleasant job. And I tried the writing life, and I tried to send my books to publishers, and not a single publisher would look at any of my ideas. Not a single literary agent would return my emails. I had made up until this point maybe hundreds of short story and poetry submissions to literary magazines, and not a single one would even acknowledge my presence. And I'd kind of given up on the writing life at that point. And being on that hospital bed and really not knowing what my outlook was at the time, because I didn't know what was really transpiring, I didn't know if I was going to get out of there, to be honest with you. And I said to myself, staring at the wall, I said, if I get better and if I get out of here, I'm going to pursue my dreams, right? And one of those dreams is being a writer. And I swore on that hospital bed that I was going to be a writer no matter what. And that if nobody else in the world would pay attention to me or accept me or even want to look at my books, that was fine. But I was going to bend the universe around me in order to be successful. I said I would do that if I got out of the hospital bed. And I said, God, if you just find a way for me to pursue my dream and make this happen, I'm going to go after it. I'm going to get at it. And so I got better, right? I got better, and I got out of the hospital, and I got healed up, and I lost like 20 pounds. I mean, I literally look like a skeleton. Like now I'm kind of full. I'm kind of filled out. I have a little bit too many lbs, but imagine me like a skeleton, and that's what I look like. And I remember recovering, and sitting and trying to sit down and write a story and being really tired and all that. But right around that time, as I was recovering and getting better, was around the time that I found Joanna Penn. So I did not know what self-publishing was at that point. I did know what it was, and I actually had this disdain for self-publishers that I didn't really, this pretentious disdain for them. I think I wrote a blog post years ago that I found a journal article where I was ripping on self-publishing and all. It's really funny to read if you know me now, to read that post. Oh my God, it's awful. It's awful. But it just goes to show you that you never say never, right? So I didn't know about the Kindle revolution. I didn't know about ebooks or anything. All I had about self-publishing was the author with tons of books in their garage with terrible covers, right? And so finding Joanna Penn and finding the Alliance of Independent Authors and Orna Ross really helped me open my mind to a new path, right? That I actually could do this on my own, and I could be professional about it, and I could write books that readers would someday be willing to buy. And so I said, you know what? This is the answer that I needed. This is exactly the sign that I'd asked for when I was laying on that hospital bed. And so I said, this is what I'm meant to do. This is my calling. And so I jumped into that. And so I learned everything I could about being a writer. I learned everything I could about ebooks and formatting, everything I could about marketing. I listened to every episode of The Creative Pen. I listened to, up at that point, every episode of the Self-Publishing Podcast, which they have a lot of episodes, and I listened to at least their first 200 episodes at that point. And I took notes. So I paid attention to everything. The Sell More Book Show. I read, and it was like this bleary sales existence for like at least the first year, several years. But I remember never being happier, right? Because I had actually realized that this is what I meant to do. I'd actually followed up on that dream and kept that promise to myself, right? And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I've been perfect for the last 5 years, but I can sit here and tell you that I did keep that promise to myself. And I like to think that I'm doing a pretty good job of building a career that's going to last a long time. And so that's a recap of my near-death experience and how that happened, and why that gives me a quiet motivation. I think that having had an experience like that really opened my eyes to the fact that life is short. I think we can say that, but having lived it, I want to make an impact on my own life and on the lives of other people. And you can't do that sitting still, right? So I always tell people, I'm not asking you to have a near-death experience, but what is that experience? What is that tipping point for you to make you realize that you can do more and that you can do more faster, right? And so that's one of the things I always talk about, and that's why I talk about that. Some people ask, you do so much. I do so much because I don't have much time, right? I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. And so it's going to happen. But when that happens, I don't know when it's going to happen, but I want to leave behind a good legacy, right? And so that's why I do all the things that I do, and that's why I provide so much free content for you guys, is because I want other people to have that same awakening and that same realization of that urgency, and the realization that they can do more, and that they can do more than they thought that they could, because I myself have had that, right? And so I think everybody has their own moment, right? That moment when you realize, okay, this is what I meant to do. And I realize that a lot of people watching these videos may not have had that moment yet, or maybe you've just had it and don't know where to go. And so that's why I have my podcast, why I have my YouTube videos, to give some guidance to those people who need some help on that path. So anyway, that's my near-death experience. So for all of you who've been asking, I'm not private about it or anything like that. I'm always happy to talk about it because it really made me who I am today. So anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video, and take care.